From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
For decades, Mike Lupica has been at the center of so many conversations about what sports means to our culture. You could see him just during the last Olympics on the Today Show, sometimes on Good Morning America, often on ESPN's The Reporters, in the pages of Esquire or ESPN Magazine, really any place where we all sort out why these professional competitors mean so much to us as masters of strategy, as leaders of civic life, as men and women confronted with quick decisions and lifetime patterns that show us fair play and foul play. Mr. Lupica has helped Reggie Jackson and Bill Parcells explain their victorious lives through autobiographies. And he's written down realistic and resonant stories from his own experience and his own imagination about how sports can transform lives. They're written for young readers, but talk a lot about adulthood. And in this month's new release, True Legend, we see a boy on the cusp of being a man and the basketball talent that is going to be a big part of that transition, with a few supporters and, sort of predators seeking to guide that path. I'm pleased to hear from our guest on these sporting and unsporting motives, and I invite you to welcome Mike Lupica.
Well, thank you all for coming out today. If my voice fails me, I just finished a 2-week tour across the country talking about True Legend, but it's not a hardship because what I'm really talking about is a world, and I'll tell you how I got into this world, where I have found out how much young people still want to read. And I address this to the young readers in the audience today, because I have to tell them kind of a sad story about when I was growing up, because when I was growing up, there was no ESPN. There was no internet, no laptops, no Google. I know, it's starting to sound like I was little Harry Potter living under the stairs, does it? There were no cell phones. And if there were no cell phones, you know what that means, no text messaging. And worst and most tragic of all for the young people in this audience, there were no video games. So what did I do in a tragic childhood like that? I read books. And here's what's serious. With all the things that I just listed, and that's just an incredibly short list in a world where really there are no more unspoken thoughts. With all the things that young people could be doing, they still love a good story. And in that way, we're exactly the same. By the way, on unspoken thought, this won't be the first digression today. I have the attention span of like a hummingbird. So my sons will say, I have 3 sons and a daughter. My boys are in their 20s now. My daughter's 13. She pretty much runs our family on her way to her ultimate goal of world domination. And they'll say to me, Dad, you have to get on Facebook and Twitter. And I said to my youngest son the other day, I said, I write 200 newspaper columns a year. I write 2 books a year. I have a daily radio show, and I'm on the sports reporters every Sunday. I said, what do you think I'm holding back from the world? But I love telling these stories. I got into this world quite accidentally, but my books are about friendship and teamwork and loyalty. Those are the things that matter to my children, and they matter to your children. The sport may change. It may be a boy or a girl who's the main character. But I'm writing about kids trying to not just do something great in sports, but be good friends. And good, if you're not a good teammate, you're not going to do very well in my books. But I saw in coaching my children and being a parent how important sports are to kids. Before every game I ever coached, I'd call my players around me and I'd say, look up into the stands. You see all those adults up there? Every one of them would change places with you in a heartbeat and be your age and have one more Saturday afternoon to have playing with or against your friends. I said, so you got to honor this. Some of you may go on to high school or college or the pros, but if not, you're only going to have so many days and nights like this in your life, so they're important. And I tell them, you're allowed to want to win. I wasn't one of those coaches who said, oh, God, I can't even believe they're keeping score. And I said, the other team's going to want to win, so you're allowed to want to win too. But it's the experience of trying to do something great. If you start reading one of my books, you know it's not going to be smooth sailing for the main characters. They're going to get knocked down. I'm going to ask them to overcome stuff. And again, to the young people in this audience, anybody can get knocked down. It requires no talent. It requires no talent, no heart, no spirit, no character. But it's how you get back up that shows the world just how much of that you have. That's what my books are about. When my middle son was 12 years old, he got cut from a 7th grade travel basketball team for being too small. And another friend of his who was smaller than he was got cut at the time. And so this was going to be the first time that he got knocked down by sports. He had always made this team. All of his friends made this team. And the way they did it in our town was you filled out this form when you tried out, and if you didn't make the team, they'd send you a letter to tell you that you hadn't made it. So this letter is sitting on my kitchen table all day, and I'm waiting for him to get off the bus and get knocked down by sports for the first time. And when he found out, he was devastated. But the great thing about children is they're incredibly resilient. They do get back up. I, however, am more of a grudge holder. And by the way, kids, if you're going to hold grudges, try to get your own newspaper. No, wait, that's not, no. That's not the inspirational message of anyway. So the next day, I'm talking to my friend Jeff Van Gundy. You know, he does the NBA games on television for ABC and ESPN. And he says, you know, if this were the movies, you'd take all the kids who got cut, you'd start a team of your own, and you'd play the other team in town in the big game. And but I said, I don't have anything against the other kids in the town. My quarrel was more with the various Phil Jacksons in my town who were running town basketball, who felt that if, you know, life had just broken a different way for them, they would have won 11 NBA championships. But here's the problem, and again, this is addressed to the young. The problem with a really good idea, and you will find this out in your life, once it gets inside your head, it's almost impossible to get out. So 3 days later, in a moment of sheer parental insanity, baby boomer, catcher in the rye, never let your children have a bad moment, I became the owner and general manager of a rogue boys, 12-year-old boys travel basketball team. I took all the kids who got cut and I started a team of my own. I hired a coach, I called around and scheduled games, and all of a sudden, we were going to have a season that none of us were going to have. These kids were collectively going to try to get their self-esteem back, their confidence back, and do the thing that we all look for in sports, was to see if a bunch of different people can come together and get on the same page and try to do something great. Oh, by the way, another digression. This is for the adults. When I started the team, the other boy who was even smaller than my son was a boy named Connor Donovan. So I called his mother and I said, Gail, listen, tell Connor not to worry. We're going to have a team. We're going to have a season. You're having a hard time keeping up with me, aren't you? And she said, well, he's going to have to miss some time early in the year because he's in the play. I said, well, how much time can you miss being in a school play? She said, no, he's in Our Town on Broadway with Paul Newman. These are some of the sports problems you encounter up in La-di-da, Connecticut, where I live. Oh, by the way, has any adult here seen the movie The Departed? Jack Nicholson and Leonardo DiCaprio. In the first 10 minutes of the movie, there's an adorable child actor who plays the young Matt Damon character. That's Connor Donovan. So if anybody actually tells you that sports can ruin your kid's life, he's working with Martin Scorsese, and clearly I'm still going door to door selling books. Now, if there's an adult out here who's thinking, you know, someday I might like to be the owner and general manager of a rogue 7th grade boys travel basketball team, make sure when you're scheduling games, you ask the other coach how good their team is. This I neglected to do. So early in the season, we're going into these gyms, and it's like 35-3, and my kids can't even get the ball over half court. They feel worse now than when they got cut. I go home and I'd say to my wife, you know that heartwarming Disney movie I thought I was writing here? Where the good kids win? When do you suppose that's going to kick in exactly? But I went to the coach and he said, no, they're getting better. And everything I'm going to tell you about this season is true. They got better. They became a team. They got off the mat. And the second half of the season, they start to beat teams that had beaten them. And before every game, I tell them the same thing. I'd say, listen, we're not in any league here. There's going to be no postseason tournament. There's no more. I made this whole thing up. But every game you play, you're playing for the championship of any boy or girl who ever got told by an adult that they weren't good enough in sports. The first game they won in overtime in a town about 2 over from mine, I'm watching it the way you watch your own teams, where I had to like walk out of the gym because I'm thinking if they could just get one win, if they could just win one game, then this will have been worth it. And they win in overtime. The last game of the season, after they run off a string of wins now, they beat a team that had beaten them pretty badly by 1 point on a free throw with 3 seconds left, and they run around the gym like they've won the championship of the world. And now I've got my Hollywood ending. Everything I wanted the season to be, it had been. There was a boy in this game named Tim Hunziker who scored 18 points who could not play dead at the beginning of the season. He couldn't make a layup or make a free throw. It was like I couldn't believe it was the same boy having a night that he'll remember for the rest of his life. So anyway, the season ends. We have a pizza party, and we all know that we've experienced something pretty special, but I can't let it go. So about a month later, I'm talking to my agent, and I said, I don't know whether this was a movie or it's a story about these kids or it's a novel. And she said, write an outline for a novel and we'll see what happens. I write a 3-page outline. I give it to her like 11 o'clock in the morning, built on the bare bones of what had happened to us. She sells it like 2 hours later, and now I'm a young adult author. Except I have no idea how to write this kind of book. Now, my wife, in retrospect, says, honey, let's face it, you writing from inside the mind of a 12-year-old seems pretty much a perfect fit as far as I can. She said, you've been locked there for like 40 years, but it's nice that we can now use our immaturity to help the family. But it's the summer. I'd never written a book in the summer. And, you know, I had been writing adult books for 20 years. And by the way, when you become a children's author and you say you wrote adult books, it sounds a little hinky, doesn't it? But it wasn't, they weren't that kind of books. So finally, after complaining for about a month, I write 2 chapters. I write 20 pages. We're out on the beach in the summer. I give these pages to my wife to read while the boys and I are getting ready to watch a baseball game. She comes back about a half hour later, and she has the pages in her hand. And she has a look on her face that in 26 years of marriage has never, ever, ever meant anything good for me. Never, 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 never. Never, 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 never. And then she says, I'd like to speak to you in your office, please. Nothing good has ever happened in there. My sons are there, so you can't, you're trying to act manly, but I'm thinking, no, don't make me go in anything. I'll go in the yard. I'll sleep outside. Don't make me go in the... We go in the office. She throws the pages down on my table. She said, this is the best thing you've ever written. Now, please shut up and finish the book. This is what passes for an inspirational pep talk in our marriage. So now my boys at this point are like 10 and 12 and 14. And they, in full disclosure, they would fake being abducted by space aliens to get out of their own summer reading. They want to go to the beach, play ball, eat, and sleep. Actually, they're in their 20s now, and their goals haven't really changed appreciably. But I got to find out if this story that I'm writing is going to appeal to young readers, so I'm letting them read it as I go. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the summer, one of them would come up every 3 or 4 days and say, did you finish any new chapters yet? And I'd say, yeah, but I didn't. They said, we don't care. I've got 3 boys hanging over my printer in the middle of summer to find out what was going to happen next. And that was the first time that I thought that this book might be something that others would want to read. It came out in October of 2004, and my publisher printed like 20,000 copies of this book, which was called Travel Team. And it ended up selling like 500,000 books. And I would love to tell you that I knew that I was sitting on some sort, I didn't. But as I went around the country, everybody had a story that had elements to it. It didn't have to be basketball. It didn't have to be too short. It didn't have to be a boy. It didn't have to be a 7th grader. But kids are constantly being told that they're too something. They're too... I was always amazed in coaching how obsessed even well-meaning parents were with what kids could not do as opposed to what they could. And all of a sudden, moms and school librarians are telling other moms, there's this book. And he didn't want to read before, and now I got to go up and rip it out of his hands. And now I was in this world. And that's only been 8 years for me. But what I have found in my own life, and not just with my own children, that with all those things I talked about, children still love to read. They love to keep turning pages. And it's been the single most inspiring. I've done a lot of stuff in my career, but the thing of which I am most proud is what's happened with these books in the last 8 years. Right up until True Legend, which is, again, is a book about a kid who's going to be the next big thing. They call him Little LeBron. He's a high school junior. And believe me, he doesn't get to be any better a basketball player by the end of this book, but he becomes a much better friend. And that's his real triumph for Drew Robinson in this book. I write about regular kids trying to do something great, to look down on themselves and find the best in themselves in sports. I have no vampires in my books. I have no werewolves. The only Hunger Games in my book, occasionally one of the main characters does get hungry and will snack on. I'm not an idiot. I see how those books sell. So the day I can figure out how to put a vampire in center field and a werewolf at second base and a little wizard with glasses behind him, I'm going to do it. But for now, I'm writing about the faces that I see. Believe me, when I'm out talking about these books, I'm at 2 schools a day and then either a library or bookstore at night. The response is tremendous. And I tell kids all the time, I honor the relationship we have. I tell them, if you keep reading these books, I'm going to keep writing them. When Travel Team began to take off, my wife said, are you going to be happy just writing this kind of book? And I said, yeah, I think I am. And she said, good, because getting kids to want to read is going to be the thing that you're going to be remembered for best. And now that I thank you. True Legend is the 16th book that I have written for young readers in the last 8 years. I go down to my little writing place in the morning and I close the door and these kids come alive for me. And it's the best part of my working day. For 200 to 250 pages, I get to make sports in the world come out the way I want them to. That's not a bad job. When I was about 10, I read books about a character named Chip Hilton. Is there anybody just like tragically as old as I am that ever read the Chip Hilton books? God, you are old. You are so old. But those books were about friendship and loyalty and teamwork, and it took me a long time. I read them to my sons before they could read as bedtime stories, and I still didn't figure out that that's the kind of book that I was supposed to be writing. I also read these books called the Rick Brant Science Adventures. They probably cost $1 back when I was growing up. And a few years ago, I wondered if you could even still find these books. And I ordered one from this out-of-print place, and it comes in the mail, and it's called Smuggler's Reef. And I open it up, and it looks exactly like the one I owned when I was 10 years old. And the logo for the Rick Brant Science Adventures was a lightning bolt on the binding. And I turn this book over, and there's that lightning bolt, and I run my hand over it, and it's like 40 years of my life have disappeared. And I'm as excited to be holding this book as I was the first time I did as a boy. When I go around now and boys and girls come up with Travel Team or Heat or the first books, and they look like they've been read and reread and maybe run over by a car, that's my kind of book. That's my kind of book because somehow, in some way, I've been able to pass on my own love of a good story to them. Now, I'll tell you one more story about my son. But, you know, I have to tell you this. Ned talked about my other career, okay? And I'm constantly astounded how the biggest stories in sports can turn on the smallest moments. 8 years ago, the Red Sox are about to get swept by the Yankees in the playoffs. They're 3 outs away from losing. The Yankees bring in the greatest closer of all time to get those 3 outs. And here's what happens next in Fenway Park. A walk, a stolen base, and a single up the middle. Now, all this does is tie the game. If you're the most optimistic Red Sox fan in the world at this point, of which there were like 8 on the planet at this point, you're not thinking, oh, we got him right where we want him. And if you're the most pessimistic Yankee fan, of which there were none, you're not thinking, we're in huge trouble. But they were in huge trouble, and they didn't know it. They lose in extra innings that night. They lose in extra innings the next night. Guy goes out and pitches on a bloody sock. Guy hits a grand slam in Game 7. It becomes the greatest. Are you a Yankee fan? Oh, that is too bad. Is this bringing up bad memories? Well, let me finish the story, you big baby. Suck it up. You've won 27 world championships. What, would it kill you to give one to the Nationals this year? I don't think so. It becomes the greatest baseball story of all time. And how did it start, though? With a walk, a stolen base, and a single up the middle. Anybody remember the night our college kids beat the Russians in hockey in Lake Placid? I was there that night. And it's 2-1 Russians at the end of the first period. There's a bouncing puck. 10 seconds left. They're going to stop playing, except a kid from Minnesota named Mark Johnson picks it up, and he scores with 2 seconds left. And all of a sudden, the night had changed. And it torques off the Russian coach so much, he takes the best goalie in the world and puts him on the bench. And all of a sudden, it's the third period, and my friend Michael Eruzione puts one in with 10 minutes left, and it's the greatest night that this country's ever had in sports. Eruzione said for 32 years, if that putt is a foot the other way, I'm painting bridges for a living. But it wasn't a foot the other way. It's the biggest story we've ever had. And how did it start? With a bouncing puck at the end of the first period. That's, a friend of mine once said, when he was asked to explain the growth of ESPN and sports over the last 25 years, he said, you can't go to Blockbuster and rent tonight's game. That's the beauty of sports. When travel teams started to take off, I would take my son Alex, to whom it had happened, with me to gatherings like this so he could experience with, because it was something we had experienced together. And one night we're at a bookstore in Danbury, Connecticut, and I've taken the questions. This isn't like the Tonight Show where you cheer. You know how they say Brooklyn? Oh, you want to cheer that too? Okay. So we're in Danbury, Connecticut. And all the questions have been taken, and I'm about to sign books. His hand goes up in the air. And I know no good can come of this because he hasn't told anybody he's my son. He said, I've got a couple of observations, Mr. Lupica, and then I guess I have a question. I said, well, go ahead, son. It's getting late, but go ahead. He said, well, first of all, congratulations, because, listen, your talk tonight, it sounds like the book's doing really well. And I went through my whole thing that everybody had a story like it, and moms and librarians and yeah, and he said, it sounds to me like none of this would have happened if your son hadn't been cut from that team. Now, for the last 10 years, I have said to him, Alex, if you'd actually applied yourself a little more to basketball and shot a few more hoops in the driveway, you could have overcome that lack of size. Of course, I would have been screwed because I got no story. I said, do you have a question coming along anytime soon, son? He says, yes, I was wondering, has that son been able to share in any of the royalties for the book? I've explained to him in the years since that car that he rode around in high school didn't buy itself, and that Boston College didn't pay for itself. But here's the point. When I say that sports can change in a moment, so can your life as a writer. My son got a letter, and he didn't make a team, and he got off the bus one day, and he got his heart broken by sports, and we started a team, and we had an unbelievable season, and my life as a writer changed that day. I will leave you with this before we take some questions. If you look at the story I have told you today, it wasn't Rick Brandt and his science adventures who got hit by lightning. It was me. Thank you very much. If you have questions, we'll take some questions, and then I'll go over. Where am I going? I'm going somewhere to sign books. Somewhere. Do you go on the mic? Is that how we do it? Is that the way we do it? Yeah, if you could just find a nearby microphone.
Check. There.
There you go.
All right, there we go. You talk about writing books, and I have read a few of yours, and I very much like them. But my question is, you mentioned Washington Nationals earlier. And we've got a little story going on there with a teenager himself. Would you ever write a book regarding Bryce Harper himself, or a story of a...
I love Bryce Harper. You know why? You knew he was good, and he had something going on when Cole Hamels hit him about 20 seconds after he was in the big leagues. And I just wish they'd pitch your guy. Because it seems to me, I was looking this up, this city hasn't had a playoff team since 1933. I think we needed a little better plan for the star pitcher.
My question is that in all your books, did all of them come from your real life or just the travel team?
Oh, everything. The question is, did they come from real life? Everything in my books comes from stuff I've seen as a coach or as a parent. The dialogue comes from things I have heard at my dinner table and from the back seat of my car and just being around kids. I'm always amazed when people say, oh, your characters sound like real kids. I said, well, they ought to. And my kids, when they were younger, and my daughter still is, she'll say, no, Dad, she wouldn't say that, or he wouldn't say that. And I'll tell you one other thing. I take great pride in writing great girl characters. Because with a 13-year-old daughter, if I don't, the consequences are calamitous for me. By the way, for the boys and girls here, this especially for the boys, this is as good a time as any to have a little talk about girls. No, not that talk. It's not that talk. This is about the age where boys, we find out that girls are just a little smarter and cooler than we are. No, we're not. It's not like we're not smart and cool. We just get a step behind at this age. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to catch up. Now, someday when you're married, you'll say to your wife, you know, this guy came to Washington one day and he was trying to tell me that girls are smarter and cooler than boys. At which point I will guarantee you your wife will say, that Mike Lupica was like half a genius, you know? And at this point, boys, just take this with you, because I'm not just here to entertain. I'm here to educate as well. Here is what I want you to say at that point, because these words will eventually move mountains in your lives. You're right, dear. Say it like you mean it, too, because if they sense insincerity, it won't do you any good at all. Go ahead.
Mr. Lupica, have you ever written about soccer?
Have I ever written about what?
Soccer?
Soccer. I wrote a book called Shootout. One of my comeback kids books. It's one of my absolute all-time favorite stories. Okay. Yes, sweetheart.
What was your inspiration to write the book Hero?
Oh, yeah, I did write one book that had some magic powers in it because I was also a comic book kid. And this is really like a comic book hero, Zach in Hero. But here's the real reason I wrote Hero. Because I'd always wanted an answer to this question. Now, let me see a show of hands here. If you could only choose one, which one would you choose? Would you rather fly or be invisible? Be invisible. Let me see fly. Okay, let me see invisible. See, it was always half and half, so I let him do both in this book. So that's where Hero came from.
How old were you when you started your first book?
How old was I when I started writing my first book that actually got published?
Yeah.
I was about 30 years old. Okay. And then I've written a book or two a year pretty much ever since then. It's all I wanted to do was be a writer. So if you're buying my books, I'd encourage you to keep doing that because I really have no other skills. I don't count radio and television. Believe me, if I could get my own show, anybody can.
Did any of your inspiration for books come from your own experiences, not just?
Yeah,
people you've
when
been
I
around?
played, yes. I mean, it's not like I've shrunk a foot since I was a kid. So I was a little guy in sports. In fact, I still hold the New Hampshire State high school basketball record. I actually broke my glasses 14 times my senior year. So I've always sympathized with the little guy in my books. Yes,
Okay, I brought travel team, and
that's what I'm talking about.
I was wondering if you could sign it for me.
Yeah, no, of course I'll sign it.
Mike, talk about the Jeremy Lin story. Here's a story about a kid who comes out of nowhere and takes his team to places that no one thought it would go last season.
Whoa. They won a few games.
It still got knocked out in the first round. If you were writing that as a kid's novel, would it have turned out differently with him leaving and the whole business of the NBA somehow taking over this feel-good story?
It was a tremendous story. It was like nothing I'd ever quite seen, especially in New York. I don't actually think it would have happened in another city. It was, the season was lost. He came off the bench. They had no other options. Their best scorers aren't playing. And I think he actually got a little over-evaluated. They started talking about him like he was Walt Frazier. They had him halfway to the Basketball Hall of Fame after about 6 games. And no, but a lot of what happened is what happens in my books. But the reality was the complications of signing him for the money that he wanted would have handicapped them going forward. And so, yes, the feel-good story became a business story, but they often do in the modern world of professional sports. And we'll find out in Houston who's right and who was wrong about him.
I have 2 things to say. First of all, I want to thank you for signing the book for the kid who came up and asked you to sign the book, because a couple years ago I came and I had my completely killed copy of a book that I loved, and I saw the author walking around and I asked her to sign it, and she goes and she tells me the times when she's signing. And
You know what? J.K. Rowling should not have done that. That was wrong.
And just a question I have.
But listen, let me tell you something. It's never a hardship to sign one of these books. I am working for you. It's not the other way around.
And from the point of view of a sort of aspiring author, do you feel like your stories and characters are based on real life or what you wish would have happened to you?
They're based on things that did happen, but as I said before, they're also based on what I'd like to happen. And I'm not saying that every good guy wins the day or every bad guy gets his, but I have a certain point of view, okay? I want certain kinds of behavior to be rewarded. I only coached not because I wanted to have this time with my children, because I knew that one team that spring or fall in our town, kids were going to do things the way I wanted them to do it in sports. And so, yeah, a lot of it's reality and a lot of it is wishful thinking in my books.
Hi. So I just had a question about you actually writing the books. What's the hardest thing you have to overcome when you're actually writing one of these books?
I have to tell you, there's always a point in the story about 100 pages in where I don't know where it's going to go. But most of the time, I don't get writer's block. when I start to finish one book, I'm finishing one right now. I was writing it on the, I showed everybody today. Marissa, can you show me that? I have props. It's like a PowerPoint presentation. I write about 10 or 15 pages longhand before I type it into my laptop. So this was being written today on the way down because I'm just like my readers. I'm about 30 pages from the end of this book I'm writing, and I can't wait to find out how it ends. Let's take a couple more. Yes?
What inspired Heat?
What inspired Heat? Okay, I'll try to condense this answer. The adults here will know that in 1994, what is this, a photo op? In 1994, there was a baseball strike that ended up canceling the World Series. And everybody knew what the last day of the season was going to be. It was August 12th. And I wanted to go up to Yankee Stadium. There was an afternoon game to sort of mourn what was about to happen, but celebrate baseball. And I got up there early, and there used to be a park across the street. It's actually the site of the new hideous Yankee Stadium. this glorified shopping mall. And no, I like the old one. The old one was pretty great. And there's 30 kids from a youth center in the Bronx playing soccer. And again, a good idea gets into your head. I went over to the woman in charge, and I said, would they like to go to the game today? And she said, are you kidding? I run back across the street. I go to a ticket taker I know. He said, somebody's so angry about the end of the season, he just turned in 30 tickets. He said, they're yours if you want them. I run back. I get these kids. We go to the game together. All 30 of them came from within like a 2-block radius of the old Yankee Stadium. And during the game, I asked how many of them had ever been inside Yankee Stadium. And the answer was 3. And that day, I started to think, what would it be like to have a ballpark basically in your backyard, to see the lights, to hear the cheers, and not be able to get inside? And that's where Michael Arroyo, wanting to pitch the big game in Heat, came from. It's like I said, good ideas. They're tough to get out of your head.
I noticed, like in some of your books, like the one I brought $1 Million to, like with some of really well-known baseball, like sports players. Do all of your books have that?
Do all of my books have what, son?
Do all of your books include like well-known?
Oh, like real players? I throw some real players in. Tom Brady is in $1 Million Throw. It's a little sketchy. I probably should have asked for permission. But he didn't really want to tangle with me. And he came off very well. So yeah, I like to intersperse the things I've seen in my sports writing life and inject them when I can into my fiction life.
Will you ever continue the book Hero? Like, will you make a sequel to it?
I've got 3 chapters written of a sequel. I just don't know when I'm going to get to it. They're sitting right on one of my tables, and I've got 3 chapters where Zach, dials it up a little bit. And one of these days, I'll hopefully find like 3 or 4 months free to finish that book. All right, we got 2 minutes, so let's just take a couple more. Yes, young lady.
Have you ever written a book about swimming?
I have not written a book about swimming, and it's one of my favorite sports. So far, I have written about team sports that I feel like I know something about, though the actual athletes that I cover would dispute the fact that I know anything about.
Have you ever considered writing a book about anything other than sports?
Well, Hero's really an adventure story. It's an adventure story, most of which takes place in Central Park, New York City, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world.
I have 2 questions. One is, can you sign my book Heat? And the other question is, do you play fantasy football?
I have never played fantasy football until this year. And then I was forced to become a part of my radio station's fantasy football league. This I delegated to my youngest son, Zach Lupica, who is a junior in college now, believing that he knows far more about sports than I do. We are currently in the basement. I've explained to him, I'm the owner of the team. He's the general manager. And have tried to explain to him in as respectful a way as possible that owners fire general managers who underperform. He said, Dad, it's early. I said, that's what every underperforming general manager says.
Well, just a question. What do you think's the best book that you've written?
I'm always going to have a soft spot for Travel Team because that brought me into your world. My favorite story is True Legend, the new one, because it's the trickiest story, because it's almost like half a ghost story the way it starts out, even though it's really not. And I think the lessons about teamwork and friendship are more profound in this book. But any writer will tell you the truth is my favorite book is on that pad that I just showed you. It's the one I'm working out. It'll be the one that's out next fall. I cannot wait to get to the end of it. Thank you so much for coming out. Wait. I'm going to take one more. You waited a long time.
Right.
How many of my books have you read?
Like 3 or 4.
Okay, that's enough. Go ahead.
All right, so what is
You just made it. Okay, go ahead.
what like really inspired you in the first place to write like most of your books? Like I know Travel Team was like from personal experience, but like $1 Million Throw and Bad Boy, what inspired those in the first place?
All right, Bad Boy was simple. I always thought that the coolest possible summer job would be to be a bat boy for a Major League Baseball. I never was, but I thought that would be awesome. $1 Million Throw, I had seen a guy make a throw like that, like 10 years. And then I started to think, what if it was a boy who was making it? What if the money would completely change his life? But the trick of did you read $1 Million Throw? You find out that it's not his life that gets changed. It's a friend's life at the end. Okay, thank you very much for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.